So let's start.
Good. Very nice.
Hello,
Okay.
everyone. Today is the 28th of January, 2026, and we continue with our International Interdisciplinary Seminar Series in Romanian Studies. Today is not just simple day, but yesterday, the 27th, there was a commemoration of the Holocaust and the genocide of Roma. And that's why today we wanted to have a talk connected to the Second World War and the persecution of Roma and Sinti. Just to mention that our talks are organized by the Roma Foundation, Zurich, Switzerland, and the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies, Uppsala University, Sweden. And here we are, Stefan Lederich, the president of the Roma Foundation, and I am Hanna Bakunova, who is currently working at the University of Alberta in Canada, but also affiliated with Uppsala University. So, as I said, it was very important for us to have a talk about the Second World War and the persecution of Roma. And we have some research published about Transnistria, governorate, and the persecution of Roma there. But still, there are a lot of questions which remain unanswered and very many nuances to which many scholars don't pay attention. That's why we asked today to present Professor Dr. Vladimir Solonari, who actually works for many, many years on the Romanian occupation of Ukraine and Moldova, on Transnistria governorate. And he started with the Jews and then also found a lot of documents about the Roma. And he's the person who pays attention to those nuances, which are very often are overlooked. So let me introduce Professor Solonari. He was born in Moldova, of course, the former USSR. Then he received his PhD in 1986. And then I will skip some of... yeah.
Okay.
And then I will skip some of biographic data, and I will say now that he is working in the USA, in Florida, at the University of Central Florida. And all of us, of course, know his book, Purifying the Nation, Population Exchange and Ethnic Cleansing in Nazi-allied Romania, which was published in 2010. It was a very important book which paid attention to the Romanian law and deportations to Transnistria. And then another one, A Satellite Empire, Romanian Rule in Southwestern Ukraine, again, based on many, many archival documents in Romanian, Russian, Ukrainian, of course, German. And I will not talk about numerous articles, but what is important that his new book is upcoming by Cornell University Press in 2026, and the title is Uniformed Murderers, Romanian Army and Gendarmerie as Instruments of the Genocide. And also recently, Vladimir Solonari published a very important article where I, for the first time, noticed that someone considers the employment, so-called employment of Roma in Transnistria. And exactly today talk title was the Romanian authorities' failure to lucratively employ deported Roma in Transnistria, part of a genocide plan. And here I will stop, and Professor Solonari, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hanna, for this introduction. This is a great honor of mine to be presenting some of my findings to this esteemed audience, and I am very excited to participate in the. I hope there will be some questions and answers session following my presentation. So maybe there will be some questions, challenges to my own findings and my own thinking, and I welcome all of them because some of the issues still continue to be not exactly clear to me, and I'm still finding words and ways of looking in the data which would be more coherent and more maybe persuasive to the readers. Let me start with the introduction of the context, and then I will go into some of the historiographical arguments connected to this problem, and then I will develop my own understanding of this problematic. So first, let me start with this map of Transnistria. This is a Romanian map coming from 1943. It is a regional map created by the Romanian Gendarmerie, and it shows the concentration, concentration camps, which Romanians quite often also call ghettos, in Transnistria. Transnistria was the region which is now mostly Ukraine, but also comprises eastern territory of the Republic of Moldova, approximately here, right? This is river Dniester in English. Nistru in Romanian, and the area beyond this to the east of Nistru, Romanians called Transnistria. In the wartime period when Axis powers occupied part of the Soviet Union, this area was allotted to Romania. It was between the Dniester and Bug rivers, Bug in Russian, Bug and in Romanian, and Bug in Russian and in Romanian, and Bug in today's Ukrainian, on today's Ukrainian maps, right? And this is the center of the region, Odessa. Now, what those administrative units within Transnistria are shown here, Romanians call them Zhudetse, and sometimes translated in English as counties. Now, on this map, it's a map from 1943, most of the camps shown here for Jews, they were located in northern areas of Transnistria, right? Northern and not eastern areas of Transnistria. But in the previous 2 years, in fact, in the fall of 1941, most of the Jews were brought actually to the Berezovka Zhudets or county here, and to Golta County here. And most of them were annihilated, right? Killed, murdered by the German ethnic militia, especially in Berezovka County in the spring of 1942, and by the local militia, which was under the Romanian gendarmerie oversight in Golta County. So here on this map, they're not showing too many concentration camps exactly because there were no more Jews over there by that time. Right. Now, to the north of this area, there is the Balta County, which this map shows more concentration camp over there. There were also some killings, but not as extensive as in the two areas to the south of Balta that I just mentioned, to Zhudetse. Now, why do I mention all of this in connection with the Roma problematic? Because when Romanians expelled part of their Roma, and it happened not in the 1941, in the summer and fall 1941, when most of the deported Jews were deported, but in the summer and fall of 1942, and Roma were brought again to that same areas to which Jews were previously brought. That is Berezovka, Golta, and Balta, and also some of them were brought to the area of Ochakov, Zhudets, in which in 1945 there were basically no deported Jews brought to. Because Romanians were afraid at the time of the disembarkation of Soviet troops from Crimea, where at that time still were raging heavy battles. And So they considered Jews as dangerous elements, so they didn't bring them to a charter. Now, see, the fact that Roma were brought exactly to the same areas that the Jews were brought initially, right? And some of those areas in which most of the killings, horrendous killings, some of them involving hundreds, others thousands, and some even tens of thousands of people. And in itself, it presents a problem. Why exactly is there? Why not to the areas closer to the, say, Dniester River, or say to the central areas? Why exactly bring Roma to the very eastern areas along the Buch River? And to that question, there is no answer. In fact, as far as I know, nobody asked them. But this is not a superfluous answer. Not a superfluous, frivolous question. It's actually an important question, because we know why Romanians brought Jews to close to the Buch. The plans were to deport them further to the east. The Jews' presence in Transnistria was considered a temporary one. Initially, Romanian governments planned that all Jews were deported further to the east, as Ion Antonescu, Romanian dictator at the time, said one time, beyond the Ural Mountains. They were deported. But then Romanians encountered German resistance to their plans, because German army was still fighting the bitter war against the Soviets, didn't want Jews in their rear. So they said, keep the Jews until the end of the war in Transnistria, and then we shall see. And obviously, Jews got stuck there, from which many tragedies followed, right? But then by the period when Roma were brought, the killings actually stopped in Transnistria. They stopped approximately in April 1942, mass killings. There were still sporadic killings, but the mass killings stopped, right? And there was no conversation that Roma would be somehow brought further to the east. So by bringing them in the areas in which Jews were previously concentrated, and which witnessed these horrendous killings, and which experienced the great devastation in the previous months, also because the over-concentration of deported Jews over there exposed the local resources to heavy pressure. So the areas were already devastated and impoverished by the time Roma arrived there. And bringing them there kind of suggests that there was some malicious intent behind this operation. So this is number one observation. But let us now talk about numbers. Ion Antonescu, in May, on the 10th of May 1942, ordered the deportation of two categories of Jews: itinerant and those who presented a danger from public order, even if they were not itinerant, or how the Romanians call them, nomadic. And so those who presented the danger to public order this is of course a very elastic category, ill-defined category. It included those who had some criminal record, but also those who were just considered by the gendarme, for whatever reason, dangerous. And so these two categories were deported in two waves. First, itinerant Roma were brought to Transnistria, and they were brought on foot or in their horse-drawn carts when the gendarmes exported them from one gendarme post to another. And when it came to the non-itinerant Roma, they were actually ordered to embark the trains, brought to Transnistria, but then on Transnistrian border, they were ordered to disembark, and then again they were brought in convoys to the eastern border, which meant meant marches, long marches of 150 to 200 kilometers, which meant by the time they arrived there, they already were completely exhausted, right? Now, one important detail needs to be added to that, is that in the fall of 1943, gendarmerie started preparing a new wave of deportation. And it looks like this time they wanted to deport all the rest of the Roma population from Romania, whose numbers they disputed all the time, from 100 to 400,000 people. There were different ways of counting them. It's a separate conversation. So it had to be much bigger wave of deportations, but all of a sudden the government decided to stop those deportations. When they decided to stop these deportations, the decision was announced on the 13th of October 1942 in the sitting of the Council of Ministers. They initially called it suspension of the deportations, and they referred mostly to the Jews. But Roma benefit from this change of policy, sudden and never explained. But there is good reason to believe that when the government was thinking to stop deportation, they were basically thinking in terms of the grand strategy. They figured out that the situation on the fronts were changing, that Germany would probably lose the war, or how they imagined it, forced to sign a compromise peace. And they wanted to get into good graces with the Western government so they would negotiate better position for Romania at the end of the war. And they believed that Jews would be important and very important in the Western capitals. So because of this, they decided they need to demonstrate some goodwill toward the Jews. And the Roma were the least of their minds, but the Roma people were beneficiaries of this sudden change of policy. Now, how many Roma in total were deported? About 25,000. People. And how many of them survived? Well, the survival rate is exceedingly difficult to calculate because Roma were constantly trying to escape. The conditions in Transnistria happened to be so horrendous to them that by all ways, by all means, they tried to escape to the east. And because of this, the gendarmes were constantly complaining they had a very bad idea of how many people were actually in the camps and how many were en route escaping and how many of them were being brought back, because the policy was never allow them to return, and if intercepted, they were being brought back. And so the numbers were constantly oscillating. So basically this is a guessing game how to calculate the survival rate. We know, however, from the descriptions, both of the Romanian authorities, gendarmes, but also local administrators called prefects, it's the heads of the administration and the Județ level, and then the level below Județ called plase, the officials were called predors, and they sometimes complained about the conditions of Roma for various reasons, also because due to the exhaustion of Roma, there was a typhus epidemic among in the settlements to which they were brought, and they were very afraid that this typhus epidemic would spill over into the surrounding areas, into the local population, and eventually onto the Romanian troops and administration officials. So they were complaining about the conditions of Roma, and we know that those conditions were absolutely horrendous, and the mortality rate was incredibly high, especially during the winter of 1942-43, right? And based on these numbers, the historians, the scholars kind of guess that probably just a little bit, like around 1/2 of them survived. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a bit less, maybe substantially less, but it's very hard to say, but we know that the survival rate was very low, and that most deaths occurred in the winter of 1942 and 1943. Now, all of these numbers and these horrendous pictures raises, of course, the question of what was the intent behind the Romanian policy? Why did they uh, deport Roma? And many scholars who worked on this question, on this problem, they answer this question in the sense that the intent was genocidal. There was a genocidal bond, that the Jews were brought to Transnistria in order to be killed there, and Roma was brought into Transnistria in order to be killed there, in order to die there. And there is a whole range of respected scholars who basically made a very clear statement to that regard. Among them, John Anchel, late John Ansel, Radu Ioanid, Benjamin Thorne, who said not that the intent was genocide, but that he said basically, and I quote, that Romanian authorities were only too happy to see Roma perish. I kind of agree with this statement largely, but I still think that it needs to be made more precise, right? And many others. But the question still remains: if they wanted to kill them, or if they want them to perish, why did they not kill them? Because the killings were reported, but they were sporadic, and Romanian authorities largely refrained from killing Roma. And sometimes they even had shouting matches with the heads of the German ethnic settlements there, called Volksdeutsche, right, who didn't have the policy of refraining from killing Roma. They who did kill them. And when Romanians found that out, they sometimes entered into the shouting matches with these German officials. So it looks like there was no policy of killing them outright. And if there was no policy to kill them outright, what the policy was there? In what sense was this a genocidal intent? And what sense was there a genocidal plan? And there is a minority opinion among the Romanian scholars who actually argued that there was no genocidal, that the high mortality rate was due to the bureaucratic incompetence, lack of resources in the area, inability to organize Roma's employment, and etc. And so this opinion was expressed forcefully by Vladimir Solonari in his monograph from '98 in English, Roma in Romanian History, and then was repeated again in his small book published in 2015, and was dedicated in particular to what he called the employment of Jews and Roma in Transnistria. And without saying this explicitly, Akim implied that had Roma be, as well as Jews, be employed and would be able to, given the opportunity to earn their living, the survival rate would have been much higher. So that's run against this idea of a genocidal intent. And that brings me to...
Vladimir, the slides are not moving.
And yes, I didn't move them. I actually didn't need, because I didn't want to read. I'm not sure. Well, we don't have much time, and now I'm coming to the point that exactly I wanted to show the slide. So here's the basic question that I want to address here. Why were not Roma provided with lucrative employment in Transnistria, right? And I'm ready to give a tentative answer to this question. And there is not one answer, but many. There were many factors which contributed to this outcome. First, we need to understand that the idea that deported populations like Roma could be easily employed in Transnistria in a lucrative way was largely wishful thinking, because we know that Roma's employment interest in Romania per se was very much tied to their traditional way of life. Roma communities lived traditionally, whether they were itinerant or sedentary, lived a very traditional, closed way of life, and they specialized in particular occupations, which occupations were very traditional and had some niche or maybe niches in the traditional peasant economy, such as the production, for example, of forks and spoons from wood, which were used by the Romanian peasants, or say the cleaning of kitchen utensils, and all various objects made from silver, right? And then other Roma were employed, say, in the brick factories, the production of bricks. But Roma were not particularly known as being an agriculturalist. And throughout history, attempts to force them into that occupation largely failed. So what was the reason to even imagine that it would be easy for to employ Roma in this way once they were deported to Transnistria? There was no reason to believe this, if any thought would have been given to such proposition. The other problem was the idea of lucratively employing Roma in Transnistria is that the problem with traditionally employing Roma in Transnistria, in lucratively employing Roma in Transnistria, was connected to the fact that their postcards and various utensils that they were bringing to the South, the instrument that they used for the production, for example, of spoons, or for the production of combs from the horns, right? They were confiscated at the entry point into Transnistria. So once those instruments, which were so important for Roma's earning their living, were confiscated from them, why would somebody expect them to be able to earn their living? This third problem with this idea of their traditional employment in Transnistria is connected to the fact that they were brought exactly to the regions which, especially Berezovka, Golta, and Achakov, in which in previous months, which in previous months were especially heavily affected by the war, and in Berezovka and Golta, so many Jews also were brought, and as I said, that led to the further depletion of resources in this area until they were annihilated there. So when Roma were brought to the areas of their settlement in Transnistria, and those were usually villages of half-home villages from the local residents were expelled, and Roma were settled there. and then expected to be guarded by the gendarmes. They came there to that regions, to those localities at the end of the agricultural season, where there were basically no work for them. And nobody even thought in this way because it was obviously that there was no way to employ them. So the local collective farm colhozes were ordered to provide uh, for Roma, but colhozes had no resources. Everything was expropriated by the Romanian state, where very minimum was left for them. And so Roma were basically left there to die. So there was no question of employing them, absolutely no possibility. And everybody knew it already in the fall of 1942. And to the extent that there were feeble attempts to employ them, basically they were paid so little that they could not survive. Okay. Now, the governor of Transnistria was completely surprised, taken by surprise, that besides Jews, he would be settled with Roma. And he fought back, trying to persuade the government in Bucharest to take Roma back. And it was with considerable delay that they issued very vague instructions of what to do with Roma, and they were issued only at the end of September 1944, and they contained no information as to how to employ Roma. So there was not even an attempt. The only policy shift that had as late as July 1943, when governor finally said, okay, now Roma is going to stay here and they need to be persuaded to start working hard in order to earn their living in an honest way. Huh. Obviously, that's the only thing that he said to that effect. And so it was the local authorities who tried to do something to the extent that even tried. Now, the situation changed only in the spring of 1943, when the new agricultural season started, and then there appeared the possibility of employing Roma. And there were, in fact, reports that Romas were employed. And we have contradictory information as to the result of this employment. For example, I give you just two quotes from the Romanian documents. On June 23rd, 1943, the praetor of Landau Rayon, that's the same as Plaza in Romania, reported to the prefect of Berezovka Judets that, quote, many Roma craftsmen are of higher quality than locals, end of quote, and that many Roma agricultural workers, in particular gardeners, were also good at what they did. And in late September 1943, the praetor of Krivoy Ozero Rayon Golta Judets says that the Roma work was yielding satisfactory results. So, to the extent that Roma were put to work, that's Romanian expression, right? There were some positive outcomes, but it occurred when only the spring and summer of 1943, right? By the time that the most difficult period was over, right? And the mortality rate subsided. But there were other reports too. And for example, in mid-April 1943, in Achakov, the Judets Varvarovka Rayon, praetor reported, there is no way we could put Roma to work. Whatever we do, they stubbornly refuse to come out for work. On the other hand, they keep stealing daily. We receive complaints from the surrounding villages of Roma stealing animals, which they bring to their communities for slaughter. Gendarmes refuse to take measures, and the Roma believe that they can continue in this way and that there is no need to work. This rayon consumes tens of carloads of cereals to feed them. And this is when the war requires so many sacrifices, everybody. But we can't even hope of ever recovering those losses. And the final paragraph, which is particularly horrifying. The Roma believed that they would go back home on the 15th of April, and almost all of them have their luggage ready. To curb this state of affairs, I beg you to approve that from now on we would distribute food to only those Roma who work, while those caught stealing or wandering from village to village would be shot, so that in this way we could hinder the spread of epidemics, especially typhus and cholera, which hit in the first place the army, disorganizing the front sphere. See, this request to shoot Roma who was stealing, in fact, implied that they would be shot without trial on the spot. It's not clear whether there is no evidence to suggest that such permission was issued, but there is evidence that shootings did take place, sporadic, and then even some hangings, right? And what's important for us to understand that this request and the silence which accompanied it on the receiving end from the high officials was in contradiction with the Romanian law, which, and actually the regulations in the occupied Transnistria, where there was established procedure trial by the military court, Curtea Marțială in Romania. But nothing of this follows from these documents. What was expected that Roma would be shot. And here we see that the hostility towards Roma was such that the officials actually were eager to receive permission to shoot them. Another problem with so-called lucrative employment of Roma, and this is the final observation of mine, was that there was heavy restriction of travel of all persons in Transnistria, even locals, but especially those in camps, in the camps. Romani settlements, forced settlements, called colonies officially, but it was basically the same as concentration camps largely. And to them, restrictions were applied, were even more strict. And then there is a particular interesting document. One Romani craftsman requested a permission to travel to Odessa in order to buy horns for the production of combs. And we don't know what the answer was, but the request came quite late in the fall of 1943. But it's likely that this request was turned down because Roma were not allowed to travel. This gives us an idea that if they were also prevented from buying the raw materials from which they could produce the traditional products for sale, how could they generate their revenue? So there were a whole set of factors which militated against the very idea of lucrative employment of Roma. And finally, even those Roma who were employed in agricultural works in 1943 during the agricultural Roma were paid barely enough to keep themselves alive. And so by the end of this agricultural reason, they basically, literally, according to many reports, had all of their clothes of them on which they were brought into Transnistria worn down. So they were not half, but completely naked in some cases, as Romanians reported. And even Romanian officials, who were largely indifferent to the plight of Roma, tried to close them. But then the governor refused to issue very primitive, they called it costume made from bag cloth, to issue these clothes for them for free. They wanted Roma to pay for those clothes. And then the local official responded, Roma cannot pay because they have absolutely nothing. They earn nothing during the agricultural season. because they were paid barely enough just to eat. So this returns me to the idea that this very thesis of the failure to employ Roma as one of the basic reasons of their very high mortality rate is basically largely utopian. The conditions in which they were held, in which they found themselves, and even the policy applied to them, restrictions on travel, a confiscation of their belongings, um, the lack of access to the raw materials, all of this made their employment largely impossible. And that brings me back to the question of the genocide. Was this policy genocidal? And my answer is still, I believe, not completely satisfactory, because this is what I think. I think that how the policy was applied, it certainly had a genocidal effect. To the extent that Roma survived, some of Roma survived in Transnistria. They survived because Romanian occupation collapsed. Romanians never allowed them to return. Never. There was never issued a clear order, let everybody return, right? Jews were allowed to return eventually. And so to the extent that they returned because the administration collapsed, because gendarmes left their posts, because the troops were retreating. There were echelons with troops going back into Transnistria. Times Roma persuaded Romanian soldiers to allow them to travel with them. Sometimes they traveled on foot. We know it from the recollections of survivors, but there was no help for them to return into Transnistria, into Romania, I'm sorry, from Transnistria. So their survival was due to the change of war. But had they been held in the conditions in which they live there a little bit longer, they probably, I should say, she certainly would not survive at all. Does it make the whole plan, the whole policy from the beginning genocidal? Does it mean that from the beginning the government intended to kill all deported Roma and Transnistria? I am not so sure. But what I'm sure at that is that they were subjected to such a neglect, to such a hostility on the part of the local administration, even if some had some empathy towards them and make people attempts to help them, but those attempts basically resulted in nothing for very little because the higher ups didn't support those more empathetic local officials. That the effect was largely the same as if there were a plan from the very beginning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Vladimir. It was very interesting, and we have, I think, a lot of questions. I have, and if someone else has, we can start. If someone else has questions, except for me. No, if not, may I start? I have several questions. First of all, let's return to Varvarovka Rayon and the last quote about the luggage ready. Was it the figurative...
Sorry, can you say it again?
It's the last slide. The last slide on
previous slide.
Yeah. The last one on Varvarovka. The last quote about the luggage ready. Almost all of them have their luggage ready. It's the second line in the last paragraph. I'm wondering if what does it mean, the luggage ready, considering the situation, how Roma arrived? Is it figurative speech, or in fact Roma could have some things with them, some stuff? And then the second question, Actually, it's about the process of the employment, how it looked in detail. I mean, what was the procedure when Roma were employed? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so considering this figure of speech, I believe that was a figure of speech. I don't understand what it could really mean. And judging from the recollections of survivors, they were going on foot and they never mentioned that they were carrying anything besides themselves and their kids with themselves. That's all I can say. Maybe there was, say, a wooden dish with them and a spoon. That's to the extent that I can imagine them having anything at all. So it likely probably was a figure of speech. Concerning their employment, we have very little information. We know that they were supposed to be paid the same salary as the local uh, population were paid while working in the collective farms, because Romanians preserved the Soviet collective farms. And we know that in the Soviet time, peasants were paid very little, farmers were paid very little while performing agricultural work. And this practice persisted throughout the Romanian occupation period. So the ratio was very little. But in fact, we have also a lot of evidence that this regulation was not applied and that Roma received much less than the locals. And sometimes even what they were supposed to be receiving, those ratios, they were delayed, or sometimes days were skipped. So they were employed to the extent that we know that in agricultural works, which were usual agricultural works, I guess, like harvesting corn, because it's a corn producing region, mainly sometimes weeding out the weeds. I can imagine this doing. There is very little information as to what kind of agricultural works they were performing. But I think the implication of these silences is that they worked alongside the locals in the field. There was just one exception, and that in the summer of 1942, some officials initiated the idea that they needed to build some primitive dugouts for themselves. And even dugouts required doors. And maybe some beams to keep the roof over their head, right? But there was very little timber. In the southern areas like Achaka and Golta, there was no timber at all, actually. But in Balta, there were some forests. And so the officials organized transportation of Roma workers in those areas for tree felling and the production of building timber, right? But those attempts to organize them for this kind of work also produced, from the Romanian perspective, very unsatisfactory results, because instead of doing what they were told to do, many Roma resorted to using this timber to produce these same wooden utensils for sale among the local population that they were used to producing. And others were just running away, using the opportunity to run away and try to go back into Romania. So this is two types of employment that I'm aware of, and basically that's it. Unlike with the Jews, we have who managed to organize themselves, and we have memoirs, people explaining how they organize metal works, repair shops. And indeed, we're able to earn money and bribe local officials with this money too, right? We don't have anything of this kind from the Romanian side. And we don't have any instruction. The governor Alexiano did issue instructions concerning the organization of workshops for Jews, but there is nothing about Roma. So that's my
Thank
answer.
you. Thank you. Some other questions? Please do not hesitate. Otherwise, I continue with mine.
Okay.
So I don't see any hands so far. Stefan, you don't have
No,
your
so far.
microphone.
No.
Okay. Then I have another question. If you came across of any information about placing together Jews and Roma in some camps at the same time.
No, they were not placed together in the same camps. They were kept separately. And there is very scant information to the effect how they perceived each other. Sonia Palti, Romanian Jew, who published a memoir. She was deported in 1942, not in 41 like most, but in 42 there were small groups deported. And she observed Roma and their condition and expressed sympathy to them. But that's largely all. Sometimes when Romanian scholars conducted interviews with Roma survivors, they asked the question. But the answers were, how I say it, suspiciously generic. There were people, we saw them, we knew that they were Jews. Not really anything concrete. Yeah, so that's the only thing I can say. Yes, that's unfortunate, but apparently there was not much of interaction between these two groups of victims. There likely was some empathy, but see, this was the world in which we should not sentimentalize it, because it was a brutal world of everybody for themselves. And in such conditions, empathy for others, especially those who do not belong to your in-group, I don't know how much space is there for it.
Thank you. And I see now two more hands. So we will start with Elena.
I was very carefully listening to you. I'm not a specialist on Transnistria, no special research on the issue you are considering. But listening to you, I wonder, do we know which kind of Roma communities, which kind of occupation these communities had in back in Romania? Because what I have read, it was a different kind of culturali deported, and
Right.
so. But you mentioned several times spoons and so on. Do we have any evidence or knowledge among where also Rudara communities, Romanian speaking Roma deported? Because Romanian speaking with Romanian identity to deport, I'm only wondering about this special point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is, tell you the truth, I would not lie. This is not the issue I'm a specialist on. I'm not a specialist on Romani culture. I know from their recollections, from the interviews, oral history interviews, that indeed people mention those who were Kaldurar. And I know those who identify themselves as working in the Greek production factories. And those who were producing these spoons and other kitchen utensils. But I don't know much of anything else. I know that some people actually boasted in their interviews that they were from respected Romani families, had some wealth, had some gold, and they complained that this gold was confiscated from them. Others spoke of how poor they were and how they became, obviously, they found themselves at the very bottom of Romani societies and communities in Transnistria. But I don't know much besides that. And I never read any research of this kind, so I can't really testify.
Thank you. Then Stefan, and we have also
I need
one question
to admit the limits of my, yeah, I studied Romanian policy more on the side of perpetrators rather than victims. And I read victims' testimonies for information of how they perceive that policy and try to make sense of what Romanians were doing to them, as well as locals, how locals were interacting with the Romani population. But no, I didn't pay attention to this. And I'm not sure that they discussed it in any detail.
We have some more questions, Stefan, and then one question on chat.
Vladimir, you actually answered my question because it was very close to Yelena's question about the Roma groups, but you said Calderasha were also present because you had not mentioned them in things, so everything is fine. And if you have some of the references to those testimonies, I think I would be very interested, and Yelena probably also, to see, to try to figure out which groups they were from, because you mentioned probably Rudare, maybe even Churaro, and some other things. So very interesting to us. Thank you.
I listed those collections of testimonies in my article that Hannah referred to at the beginning.
Okay, I will check that.
So
excellent. Thank you.
Yes, it's very easy. It's available online for free. I think it's open access journal.
Perfect.
And so, yeah.
Thank you. Now we have a question in chat, then Gregor. So in chat, Svetlana Balinchenko, why in chat? Because she is currently in Ukraine and we have all this bombing attacks. So she still joined and wrote a question in chat. Thank you for your insightful lecture. Could moral philosophical doctrine of doing and allowing harm be possibly applied here? What are the criteria and limitations, if any, of the blameworthiness in the situation? Is it doing or allowing harm to the Roma by the authorities, in your opinion? You can read, if you open the chat, you also can read.
Okay, so commission and omission. Yeah. Okay. Commission and omission. Yes, okay, there certainly was commission. Commission was commission of crime, right? Deportation, and that was a criminal enterprise. See, that's from the very beginning. Deportation was a crime. That's something we need to bear in mind, because and there is some confusion to that effect. Because Sometimes scholars use expressions like there was legal framework for deportation, there were provisions created by Romania, but there was nothing like that. The deportation was a result of an order, administrative fire. But Atmaniescu didn't have the power to issue such orders. Roma were Romanian citizens. They could not be deprived of their livelihood and just ordered out of the country according to the laws of Romania, laws in force. So everybody who participated in issuing the orders, enforcing them, deporting Roma, they were committing crime according to the Romanian law. So that was, of course, crime. Plus to that, conditions were atrocious. They all but guaranteed that the survival rate would be very low. And on top of it all, we also know that there was some lethal violence employed towards deported Roma too. It was not systematic, it was sporadic. But we don't know how frequent those sporadic killings were. Okay. But there were also the crimes of omission, allowing harm to happen, what I call criminal negligence. And my article, in fact, it's called between criminal negligence and lethal violence. And there was criminal negligence. And negligence stemmed from many reasons, including genuine scarcity of resources, tremendous pressures of local administration, which were overburdened with all kinds of tasks, and the general perception that the plight of Roma was the lowest on the list of their priorities, the lowest. They had to attend to the collection of resources for the use of Romania in the war, for the upkeep of the army of occupation, for the deliveries of goods, for the subsequent deliveries to Germany, according to the accords between Romania and Germany. And so there were many tasks that the administrators had to attend to, and Romanian population, the very bottom on their priorities. And then there was this connection, right? When criminal negligence together with the annoyance that very Roma's presence caused to the Romanian administration prompted them to request the permission to kill. So those kind of types of crimes were connected between themselves. One cannot say that it just negligence that killed Roma. No, there was some criminal intent too. And it's very difficult to figure out to what extent, what was the weight of each of those types of crimes which led to the demise of Roma, of so many Roma.
Thank you so much. I know, Vladimir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know that you
Yeah.
have to go for teaching, but can we have one last question?
The last one question. Yes.
Okay, then Gregor.
Yeah, no, it's not a question. It was more something about the question before. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
No, two things. The first thing, you've got very few cases in which you can find Jews and Roma in the same camps at the same moment. I think about Swabalka farm. You're in the deportation list, you've got something like 10 Jews with 1,000 Roma. So we've got very few cases like that for the very first question. And the other thing is about the origin of the Roma who are in the different camps. And then two things was, first, you can find some information in departure documents the documents written and in the archive in Romania, you can see, for instance, the Rudari from Alexandria will be deported, and this kind of information. So if you can link one place to in Romania to one camp, you can know the origin from the different Roma and the cultural origin of different Roma. But the people were really mixed from everywhere in Romania, in Transnistria. So you cannot say that this camp has been populated by Calderaș or by Rudar, because every families were mixed in every places. I'm just thinking about one thing is a document from the Praetor of Londau. We said that you want to split the camps by ethnic origin of the Roma. He proposed 4 ethnic origins: Dobrojanka, Rudar, Roma from Bucharest region. So he tried something. It was a proposition, and it has been refused by the governor of Transnistria, and all the people have been sent in Swabalka form. So you got few information on ethnic origin of the different Roma in Transnistria.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, that's an important aspect of which I didn't think. It was not in the center of my attention at all.
I understand.
Concerning Suhabalka, that's also an interesting observation. Yeah, I didn't think of it much, but yes, probably there were cases where they were mixing. But well, that's all we can say. Again, not something that I was paying attention to when I was working with the document. Thank you for your attention. I really need to go. I have a class in 15 minutes, really, and it's on the other hand of the campus, so I really need to run.
But thank you very
for
much.
your attention. I really enjoyed it, and thank you, Hannah, for organizing it.
Thank you so much, Vladimir. We enjoyed your talk and answers, and we will not keep you longer. I just will say that our next seminar will be on February 25th. So I will send, as usual, email to everyone. Thank you so much for questions, answers, and again, Vladimir, thank you for the talk.
Bye.
Anna, just one question. As I was late, it is possible to have the presentation share?
I will share, Grégoire. I will share.
I'm leaving, right? Okay, okay. Thank you.
Grégoire, everything will be put. The video will be put on the website on the romanistudies.ch, and the presentation will also be there, so you have everything in there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we record also a Q&A, so not only the talks and the PowerPoint.
Absolutely everything is there.
If you go to our website, you will find everything, including photographs of the speakers, and particularly Grégoire, who was the first speaker of actually all our talks and seminars, was September 22. So
excellent, good. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone, and see you on February 20th.
Bye.